Yo, what's going on? Show home correspondent John Ross Marker Scott's coming back at you with the Way Too Much JRMC podcast. I know we've had a little bit of a brief hiatus. October, November, December were jam packed for me, but it's time to get back at it. Hope all y'all had a Merry Christmas and a wonderful New Year. Happy New Year. Today is January 1st, 2024. And so what I'm going to start this year off with, first episode, just going to be a basic little Kentucky civics lesson here. And I think it's important because tomorrow we'll be back in Frankfort pushing important, bills and legislation that's important to those on the constitutional conservative, liberty end of the spectrum here. And so one of the things that's been cool for me in this whole past couple of years being involved, just learning all the ins and outs of how things work and realizing how much I didn't know, realizing things I thought I knew were wrong. And so today we're just going to start out with some basic stuff on how the Kentucky legislature works, how it compares with the federal government, and then we're going to talk about something pretty specific and pretty daggone important, which is the committee process. And so let's jump right into this. So for those of y'all watching, you're going to see I'm going to be running through a PowerPoint here. Okay, you can still see my beautiful face in the bottom right corner there. So as you can see, this basic civics, Kentucky state government. What you probably weren't taught in school, and I'm going to be honest with y'all. I've spent the last 20 years of my life thinking I was involved in politics. Even going back into high school and middle school, I was in student government, was president of my class a couple of years, vice president of my class a couple of years, got to speak at my graduation, all that good stuff. Going into college, thought I was active. My young adulthood, maybe not so much, but even here over the last 5 years, I thought I was active, but really all I was doing was just watching Tucker Carlson, Bill O'Reilly, and sharing stuff that pissed me off with my wife through Facebook Messenger, but I wasn't really part of the solution. I was just part of the problem. And so in order to be part of the solution, to me, learning these basics and knowing just how to interact with your government is extremely, extremely important. So let's just jump right into this here. So just like the federal government, okay, we have three branches of government, right? So we have the legislative branch, so Congress, which is going to be your House of Representatives and your Senate. Okay, then you have the executive branch at the federal level. That's your president and your vice president and his cabinet. All right, at the state level, it's your governor, lieutenant governor, and the cabinet. Then we have the judicial branch, which is the U.S. Supreme Court at the federal level. So, we have the Supreme Justice, the Supreme Court there. And then you have our Kentucky Supreme Court, which is made up of, I believe, 7 justices, but these are all directly elected by the public, unlike at the federal level where they're selected by the president and then vetted and confirmed by the Senate. These are elected directly by the people. It is a nonpartisan ballot, which kind of makes it tough. But yeah, so that's, as you can see, it's all pretty much the same as our federal government. Now, one thing that people do tend to forget, or they just don't know in general, is we do have our U.S. Constitution, but we also have a Kentucky Constitution. And whatever powers are not granted in the federal Constitution to the U.S. government is left to the states or the people. And so our state Constitution, which you'll hear me talk about a lot, is extremely, extremely important. Just as important, if not more important, than that of our federal Constitution, in my opinion. But it's hardly ever talked about. So let's keep on going here. So how does the Kentucky state government differ from the U.S. government? So again, federal government, you have the president. It's extremely powerful, especially here in the last 5 years with all these executive orders. And in fact, I think in the last 20 years, Congress hasn't declared war once, but we've been at war for 20 straight years. All right, as far as the legislative branch at the federal level, we have 100 senators, 2 for each state. They are elected for six-year terms. In Kentucky, ours are Rand Paul, Mitch McConnell. Then at the House of Representatives, there's 435 of them. Okay, they are elected for 2-year terms. So senators are for 6-year terms. The House of Representatives is 2-year terms. So our Kentucky's representatives are Comer, Guthrie, Massey, Rogers, Barr, McGarvey. Obviously, judicial, you have Supreme Court of the United States, 9 justices nominated by POTUS, confirmed by the Senate. At the Kentucky level, our executive branch is our governor. Now, it says far less powerful, but let's be honest. Over the last few years, it hasn't necessarily felt that way, considering our governor, Andy told us we couldn't go to church and shut down schools and shut down businesses and told you were non-essential, that he doesn't feel far less powerful. Then we have our legislative branch, the General Assembly. So unlike the federal level, we have 100 senators. In Kentucky, we have 38 state senators. Okay, that don't represent each county or anything like that. They have several counties, overlapping counties, that kind of thing. They are elected for 4-year terms. Then we have 100 representatives in the House of Representatives that are elected at 2-year terms. You'll see if you're looking at the screen, it says 31 out of 38 and 80 out of 100. That's how many Republicans there are in as far as in that branch, or the Senate or the House. So we have 31 out of 38 senators that are Republicans in Kentucky, and 80 out of 100 that are in the House of Representatives. So we're at 80% Republican. So I think anybody would say it's a super majority by any means. It's very easy. We very easily override vetoes in this state, and anytime that we don't, shame on our conservative Republicans. But this is why you'll hear me from time to time saying, like, I'm not even worried about getting more Republicans elected. I'm worried about fine-tuning them and getting this number 31 out of 38 and 80 out of 100, making those as constitutional, Christian, and conservative as possible in those already given 80 out of 100 and 31 out of 38. I honestly don't even know if it would be healthy to have any more than 80% of the legislature, or to have 80% of the legislature and the and the executive branch or the judicial branch. I don't know if that's healthy. All I know is right now we by far and away control the legislative branch. There's no excuse for not having strong constitutional conservative, Christian conservative bills getting through the Kentucky legislature. So let's keep going here. So how does the Kentucky state government differ from U.S. government? We'll keep going here. Federal government, the executive president, very powerful, appoints as cabinet secretaries. Senate confirms far-reaching executive orders to agencies. Overruling a veto of his requires a 2/3 majority. Okay, so 66%. All right, that's a very high standard. That's why you don't see many veto overrides at the federal level. State government, the governor's main powers are it's the bully pulpit, so press covers anything that's said by the governor, right? Whereas it's hard to get for any one House rep or one senator to get what they're saying out into the press. You have the Courier Journal and Lexington Herald and Kentucky Fried Politics, all those bad boys that'll cover anything that Andy says. And I want to encourage all y'all to go watch Andy and his old lady's mean tweets video that was just shared from New Year's that he does every year. God, it makes you want to vomit. So they appoint administrative and regulation boards, and anytime there's vacancies on there, and they make some limited executive orders. But again, we say limited on here, but let's remember, during COVID, it didn't feel that limited. So we do elect our attorney general, our secretary of state, our agricultural secretary, our treasurer, and our auditor. Whereas at the federal level, those are all appointed. Okay, so that's a pretty big deal. So it doesn't just because you put in a Democratic governor, like if you put in a Democrat president, they don't appoint everything under the sun. And overruling a veto of our governor in the state only requires a 50% plus one. So it's just a 51 vote and 51 votes in the House, and what is that? Basically 20. You got to get 20 in the Senate to override a veto. So nowhere near as hard on that level. So how does the Kentucky General Assembly differ from U.S. federal Congress? So it's a big, again, this is where I'm going to talk about some things that are on paper that you can know right off the bat, and it's some things that I'm going to tell you that maybe you hadn't never thought about because you'd never been somebody who went to Frankfurt or that has that kind of experience. And I've just been very lucky and been let behind the curtain over these last couple of years. So first things first, our General Assembly in Kentucky, it's a part-time job. All right, so legislators are paid on days worked with a per diem. Even number of years, we have 60 legislative days. It has to conclude by April 15th, which is what this year will be, 2024. So it's our long session. It's also when we do our budget. And then in the odd number of years, they only have a 30-day session, so they can only be down there passing bills and doing committees and that kind of thing for 30 days, and they got to conclude by March 30th. Most people operate under the assumption that all legislators can just do whatever the hell they want, whenever the hell they want to do it. That's just not true. In Kentucky, it's only the first quarter of the year when they can do anything. That's why I get pissed off whenever I look on there, and I'll provide links later on. I get mad whenever I see the legislative calendar, and on Mondays they're getting there at noon or later, I think, sometimes, and gaveling out at 4, and on Fridays they're out of there by noon. Even though those count as one of their 60 days, one of their 30 days, they're trying to get home for the weekend or whatever. Now I know these people have families and all that, but you're only there for those 3 months, and for very limited days. It frustrates me whenever I see they're not working from 7 a.m. until 6 p.m. every day when they are in session, because they got stuff to do. We're talking about millions of people that what they do is going to affect. Sometimes it feels like certain ones of them think that it's a burden that they're down there, and it's just not the way it should be. So another big factor here is they have very limited staff at a state level. And at the federal level, man, we're talking 6 figures worth of payroll for most of the reps. I believe they all have assistants, and they all have secretaries. And when you hear people talk about the swamp and the deep state, all that, that's what they're talking about at the federal level. The people that work in the buildings that don't get elected are there for decades at a time, because when a new rep comes in, the main thing they need is some stability and to know how to go about doing things, and that's where their secretaries in Kentucky we call them legislative assistants. And they probably don't call them secretaries anywhere. So we'll just call them they're interns. People on Capitol Hill at the federal level have so much power. That's why they call them a swamp, because they're there forever. And so, one of the biggest misconceptions I've seen at the state level is that we think these people have all kinds of people working for them, and that when they get in, they hit the ground running. And if they want to get something done, there's processes in place, and there's people that know how to get it done, and all that. It's just not true. Most of these people are just normal people like us that ran, and they're pretty much constantly having to campaign, so they don't necessarily always have time to be thinking about what bills they want passed and how they want to get them passed and lobbying their bills. And a lot of them, that's just not their strong suit, is getting down in the trenches and garnering support for any one issue. They're charismatic and they're good with relationships and that kind of thing, but maybe not as in the nitty gritty writing out bill language and laws and all that. So at a state level, they typically have, whether it be a House rep or a senator, one legislative assistant. Many times it's someone who's who's inexperienced, again, because it's not all of them are there year round, because since they're not there year round, whenever they leave and session ends, they shrink it down to where it's less of them there. So while they're in office or while they're in session, they still have the one legislative assistant, and they may share it between 3 or 4 House members. 3 or 4 senators may share this one person. And so those members do have access to bill writers and that kind of thing, communication staff. They don't work for them. They work for the Legislative Research Commission, which we'll talk about in a second. And so biggest misconception that I've learned through all this is we assume these people have all their ducks in a row, everything lined up, ready to go legislatively, bills they want passed, language they want passed. They know how to get it done. They know how to go about doing it. And it couldn't be any more opposite of that. That's actually not the case for hardly any of them. And again, it's not their fault. They have regular jobs. We're a part-time legislature. Some of them are roofers. Some of them are teachers. Some of them are business owners. Some of them are attorneys. Some of it's like they're from all walks of life, just like us. So, other thing is they can only once they are adjourned and their session ends, whether it be April 15th or March 30th, the only way for them to come back in to session is if the governor calls them back into session. And if he does do that, call a special session, they can only talk about what he tells them to talk about. So let's say he calls them back in because we need funding for tornado victims in Western Kentucky. While they're there, that's all they can talk about. They're not allowed to pass any legislation pertaining to anything else. Okay? And then all bills must first be read on 3 days by each chamber in order to pass. Okay, so I'm kind of jumping ahead a little bit there. So from a legislature standpoint, that's kind of the gist of when they're there, when they leave, and just brought, big picture deals there. Okay, so now let's say tomorrow is the first day of session. Now what? So tomorrow we'll go down there, and this will be my third time going down. And last year was my second time, and I assumed that was gonna be just like my first year going down. And I went from being an outcast rookie to being a veteran in one session because there's so much turnover there. I mean, it's like double-digit House reps had never been there before, so for all they knew, I'd been there for 10 years or longer. All right, most people that lobby, even though I'm not a lobbyist, most people that are lobbyists, they come and go. There's turnover, people retired and are fired, and or whatever you call it. And but that's the people that obviously the reps are going to lean on in order to help get stuff passed, right? So just like the swamp in Washington, there is also a swamp in Frankfurt, and for better or worse, like, we got to hope good people are down there from whether it be lobbying groups or citizen lobbyists that's bringing things to the attention of the legislature and bills they want passed, issues they want addressed. If we're not bringing those things to their attention, we just have to hope that it's on their mind right then, and that they don't have other people from other lobbying groups that are making other issues priority and snuffing out anything that's constitutionally conservative or Christian conservative or that's from a more of a populist standpoint that's worried about people. Because listen, a lot of stuff that we push, there ain't no money to be made in it, and so you don't have any lobbying groups down there for that. You get the hospital industry, you got big pharma, you got Churchill Downs, you got the gambling industry, you got the fraternal order police, and you got teachers unions. That's pretty much it. And then I'm down there, my redneck butt. So, yeah. So now let's get into like how does a bill become a law? So I'm not going to bore you with this video, but everybody saw the how a bill becomes a law video back in the day, and that's for the most part true. All right. One of the big things that's different in Kentucky is a law doesn't have to start in House of Representatives. A house can start in either chamber. And my son's my producer right now, so Jamie, if you have any questions, I want you to stop me and ask me. All right. So the federal level laws have to start in the House, and they come out of the House. If they pass there, they go to the Senate. The Senate makes changes. They go back to the House. That's how it's done. In the Kentucky, it can start in the Senate or the House. Other than the budget must start in the House of Representatives. And this year is a budget year. So for those of us, and today what we're going to focus on is the process a bill has to go through to become law, okay? And then basically a specific part of that process is called committees, and how committees work and how important they are in the legislative process. So let's say a bill begins and it's written, all right? So not even discussing how that bill has to get written. Let's say that we have a bill that's ready. It's already been approved, been filed by somebody in the House or in the Senate. What happens to it? Well, first thing that's going to happen is it's going to go to what is called the Committee on Committees. Okay, so in Kentucky, the Committee on Committees is just made up of Senate and House leadership. So in Kentucky, on the House side, you got David Osborne, David Meade, Derek Graham, Suzanne Miles, Jason Nemus, Rachel Roberts, Stephen Rudy, Sherilyn Stevenson. On the Senate side, you got Robert Stivers, Julie Rocky Adams, David Givens, Gerald Neal, Damon Thayer, Reginald Thomas, Mike Wilson, David Yates. So these people, anytime you hear me talking about leadership, that's who I'm talking about, are those people. Okay, so this committee on committees and this leadership panel is of extreme importance, and they're voted in by the members of each caucus. A lot of times it's something that it happens quick. It happens when they're at their it's either at their, I think it's when they're at their retreats before session starts. And even though there can be lobbying and campaigning going on for people that want to run for these seats, a lot of times they just end up being ancestral and they stay, and the same person stays there for forever and ever. Okay, but this Committee on Committees or leadership panel is extremely important because they determine where every bill goes and if every bill gets heard. And currently, they decide what language even gets through whenever a bill is decided it's going to get heard. Okay, so you have a bill you want, let's say it's education related. You file it because our state constitution requires a bill to be assigned to a committee. Every bill must be assigned to a committee. They created this committee on committees to exercise that constitutional requirement. So now the committee on committees doesn't openly hear any bills, any legislation. They just decide if it's going to be able to get heard in another committee. So it's kind of a backhanded way to like perform that constitutional requirement, but it is what it is. So first thing first, if a rep or a senator wants their bill to even be discussed, they have to convince these people, this group of, 16 people, they have to convince them, so 8 on each side, I believe, something like that, whatever. In Kentucky, all that matters is the Republicans because we control so many of them. So in the House, they have to convince David Osborne, David Meade, Suzanne Miles, Jason Nemus, Stephen Rudy. They have to convince them, those 5 people, that their bill is important and that the general public wants to hear it and that it's not just a bunch of dumb hillbilly rednecks that want it heard. And that seems a lot of times to be the case. They don't, even though the people are overwhelmingly wanting a bill to be heard, it doesn't get heard because it dies in this committee on committees. So in the Senate, I've been told it's going to change this year, and they are going to reassign every bill out of the committee on committees to their regular statutory committees. In the House, I'm not sure of that. I don't believe they've changed. It used to be like that before COVID, and it hasn't changed back over there yet. So now let's say for somehow a rep or senator gets their bill out of the committee on committees and it goes to a regular committee. All right. Well, now they have, committees to deal with pretty much any sector out there. So we got the Rules Committee, then the Agriculture Committee, Appropriations and Revenue, Taxes, Banking, Insurance, Economic Development, Tourism, Labor, Education, Families and Children, Health Services, Judiciary, yada, yada, yada. So again, we're going to focus on education as our example right now. So whether it be the House or the Senate, the bill is sent to the Education Committee. At that point, you would think that the person that controls the Education Committee would be the one to control whether that bill gets heard or not. Unfortunately, that's not the case in Kentucky right now. And I'm not talking trash. Like on the Education Committee, it's James Allen Tipton that is the chair of that committee. And then you got Shane Baker and Timmy Truitt, I believe, are the vice chairs of the Education Committee. You would think they would decide what bills would get heard in committee and therefore make it easier for a legislator to come in and lobby and try to convince them that it's an important subject. Unfortunately, it's that committee on committees. They decide what committee everyone's going to be on, who the chairs of the committee are, who the vice chairs of the committee are, all that. So none of that's voted on by the members of that committee, anything. And so, unfortunately, right now, with the way things are set up, no bill gets heard in a committee without the blessing of the committee on committees. And then even once it's on that committee and being heard, it's normally already predetermined how things are going to play out. So one thing that frustrates me, and I've talked with House reps and senators about this, is how little input. These committees are meant to be laboratories to make a bill better, not just something they have to check a box on and give it a stamp of approval because the committee said to, right? What they've turned into is, if you look back and see, very, very few bills are actually getting a ton of recommendations and feedback in the committee and then changes made and it brought back. Usually what happens is there's a behind the scenes thing that goes on. It's called a committee sub that is agreed on by both chambers leadership, both committee on committees, and said, okay, we're okay with this language, and that'll get brought forth. And so the bill that could be read beforehand by the committee members is no longer even the bill, and they're getting that right before the committee hearing starts. So this isn't good for anybody. It's not good for Democrats. It's not good for Republicans. It's not good for citizens. It's impossible to be engaged in your government. when you're not even privy to the information that's going to be talked about on any given day. Okay, and so, but for right now, it is what it is, and those committee subs are the way things are working right now. That's how bills are getting put through. So at that point, if it goes, let's say it luckily gets on the education committee. Let's say the education committee votes it out, approves it. Well, now it goes to the floor of whichever house. All right. So whether it be the House or the Senate, let's say the House approves it. Okay. And let's say there's no amendment. So there also can be other things, and we'll talk about this in another show probably. There can be more amendments filed when it's on the floor. That's one of my personal favorite things to do. I love getting amendments filed to get pressure put on sponsors to make changes and show leadership where the people are at on any given bill. But let's say it's in the House, gets out of the House Education Committee to the House floor, passes there, then it goes over to the Senate and it starts all over again. Starts in the Senate Committee on Committees, goes to the Statutory Committee, yada yada. Another committee sub can take place, whatever. It'll either die over there, not even get a committee hearing. It'll get voted down in committee. In order to get passed out of committee, go to the floor. It can be passed straight up the way it was when it came from the other house, the other chamber. We'll call it the chamber. Or changes can be made, and at that point, it would go to what's called a free conference committee. Well, they'll just decide by cover of darkness what language they want to pass on it, and then send it back to both chambers to get voted on. Okay, so moral of the story is so much of this stuff is happening, like I said, under cloak and dagger, cover of darkness. And it seems like we think there's a very democratic process. And again, I'm not even claiming that everyone here is a bad actor. It's not what I'm saying. Okay, but when you put so much emphasis on such few people, the time it takes and all the things that they need to do then becomes a factor. And so a lot of the stuff just gets brushed under the rug, or they don't have time to consider the issue as thoroughly as they should, and so it kind of gets this. Well, we'll deal with it next year. Okay, so yeah, that the leadership teams, the committee on committees, they're so extremely powerful. And so that's one thing that really, really, really needs to change on there is there needs to be more delegation and much less helicopter parenting, micromanaging, And so, in addition to that, the leadership teams they're setting the legislative calendar. They're assigning offices and legislative assistants, so they can move your office and put you over to the Democrats if they want. They appoint committee chairs. In short, they determine what legislation will get voted on, when it will get voted on, and largely determine what gets passed. Okay, so even though we're talking about how bills are working and all that, like at the end of the day, there's so much emphasis put on this committee on committees that if there's going to be one thing you're going to learn going into this, before we get into this, it's going to be who those people are and do your research on their personalities, that kind of thing. And then I'll continue trying to do videos to, whenever big bills come up, and we'll talk about those individual committees and what that process will look like and all that. So yeah, so that's the committee process. Or I wish it was easier to break it down, and I wish I had some people here with me to do some Q&A on. So I love giving behind the scenes feedback and telling people some stuff that maybe the legislators themselves can't discuss. I think it's fun to give everybody a look behind the curtain, since I've been so blessed in getting that. But I mean, listen, it's a hairy process. It's not as eloquent and beautiful as reading the Constitution may make it sound, because things have been perverted over the years, and just things have been expeditiously changed or manipulated, maneuvered to get it to where it's just more workable or more easily controlled by those in power or what have you. But yeah, so that's what I wanted to give you today, just a basic breakdown of the state legislature. This is a basic civics lesson. I wanted to begin talking about the committee on committees and just the committee process. So if any of y'all have any questions, or you think I got anything wrong, or you want to know anything else, just shoot me an email at jrmc@waytoomuchmedia.com. Follow me on Twitter. Obviously, follow me on the YouTube page. Anywhere else on the audio platforms, Apple, Spotify, I'm on all those shows or on all those platforms. And I will be there. I plan on being there every day of the session. I may not be there Wednesday of this week because I'm going to be on another podcast talking about some of this stuff. But if you're ever going to be down there, make sure you reach out to me. I'd love to help you, get into the room and have some dialogue with your rep and your senator and all that stuff. I'm always saying that I can't do it all, and I don't expect to be the one that does it all. I'm not trying to hoard power. I'm not trying to hoard relationships. I want to share the relationships that I've been that God's given to me in our legislature, and share the wealth. And I'd love to have 100 more of me's down there, better looking me's. So again, thanks a lot for listening. I appreciate your time today, and you have a great rest of your New Year's.